It was more important for him to look after his family at this moment in time. If a lot more players think that way, where's cricket without players?
Well, hello and welcome to this very, very special show. What incredible 24 hours we've had. The Indian Premier League has been suspended. What a sequence of events. And to mark this, we've brought together Neil Manthorpe, Steve Harmison and myself, John Norman, to really try and make sense, not so much of what's happened, but what will occur moving forward. Neil Manthorpe, you've been across this story from the outside. I mean, Manners, if I could turn to you first, can you put into context at all just the size, the seismic nature of the decision that has been taken today and how it affects world cricket in the short and long term?
It's difficult to know what measurement unit to use. So let's start with dollars. That's the easiest one and most understood by most people. I've never quite understood how much a billion actually is. It's never been in my lexicon, really. But the tournament is worth 6.8. It's valued at $6.8 billion. That's the value of the tournament. The amount of money that it's, I mean, each event is worth in excess of 700 million. And there are a lot of people with a very, very great deal of money at stake. There are contracts in place for advertising and broadcasting revenues. And as we saw last year, when the world was in the grip of the pandemic, we just knew that there was no way that the IPL was not going to take place. And exactly the same thing applies to this year's event. Last year, it wasn't a question of if the IPL could take place. It was simply when and what would have to be cancelled and who would have to have bilateral tours moved or cancelled or changed. Every other tournament and every other bilateral series was flexible. The IPL wasn't, and they moved to the UAE. And this event will have to be finished, John. You know, there are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And I know that sounds dreadful, given that there are hundreds of thousands of people dying in India, and that should be so much more important, and is so much more important. But you know what? Life and death live alongside the free capital world, I'm afraid. That's the reality. That's the truth. The tournament will have to be finished, and whatever fixtures are cancelled or moved or postponed, whoever takes the hit around the rest of the world, that's just collateral damage.
Delighted to say, or wish it was in better circumstances, but we are joined by Indian broadcaster Chetan Narula. Chetan, you know, we've been chatting on WhatsApp, haven't we, for weeks about this, and so it's come to pass. And you know, it was always going to be the most optimistic of individual to think that the IPL could do what no other league really has managed to do, and that's get through COVID unscathed. But here we are. So what, from where you are you hearing? Officially suspended, but when do you expect the IPL to finish up its season?
First of all, John, let me remind you, it was 10 days ago that you texted me and asked, what will it take for the IPL to stop? I mean, the answer there was multiple positive cases and, overseas players wanting to fly home. That has come to pass in the last 10 days. Of course, the Australians were really concerned getting home, and rightly so. Of course, the number of positive cases does not help matters. Suspension of games. And today, multiple more cases expected. So paramount safety of the players, and that's why they needed to go home, and the IPL needed to stop, and rightly so this time around. Without these cases, perhaps it could have gone on. Maybe they could have last night. When I say last night, I mean Monday night. The news was that they were shifting to Mumbai, taking all the teams, taking a week's break, taking all the teams, creating the bio bubble and playing in the 3 stadiums in Mumbai. So that was an option, but that went out the window as soon as you had more positive cases today. The latest that we're hearing is that it's been suspended indefinitely. That's postponed. The second half of the tournament has been indefinitely postponed. There's no way, with the overseas players flying off or preparing to fly off, there's no way that the league will resume anytime soon. From what I've been told, the players are in quarantine for 4 days wherever they are, and they will have 3 tests before they are allowed to move out and go to their families. And that includes the foreign players who will be flying off. I'm not sure about the Australian players. What are those logistics? So that's there. When it can happen, when it can resume, I'm not sure. There's a small window in June, but it's too hot in the UAE. I'm not sure the IPL can resume in India so soon. September is the window after the Indian Tour of England, before the T20 World Cup. That's a window. Either way, whenever the IPL resumes, it is going to have an impact on the international cricket calendar.
Neil Manthorpe's watching on. Manners, South Africa are due to tour India in September. Now, you're already skint. Can you give us some kind of idea of what it would mean if that tour is pushed back, another lucrative tour that isn't going to happen because of COVID?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's part of the ODI Championship, the series in India. But you may remember last year, just over a year ago, the South African Director of Cricket, Graham Smith, agreed with the BCCI President Sourav Ganguly, old mates, captains on the field, agreed for India to come to South Africa for 3 T20s, just a flying visit, just to help South Africa out, help the South African finances out. That small, very small, the shortest possible tour was worth in the region of $10 million. Now that would have made a massive, massive difference to South Africa. That's in the region of 150 million rand. So that's long since gone. That one's burnt off. And it's going to be impossible, isn't it? I mean, I mentioned in the first half of the program about collateral damage, and frankly, a 3 ODI series between South Africa and India, a bilateral series, is it will be one of the first to go. I mean, that's the first thing you throw out the life raft when the IPL starts talking about resuming. As I said, it's just absolutely no way. I mean, Harmy was joking, I think, just before we started recording, about the Ashes being affected, the Ashes being moved. But you know what? I wouldn't rule it out. Such is the dependence of the ECB and Cricket Australia and the rest of the world, obviously, on the BCCI and on Indian revenue. And if the BCCI say, I'm sorry, we are actually going to have to finish the T20, the IPL in that September-October window just before the T20 World Cup, and that means that everything gets pushed back by a fortnight or even a month. And if the ECB and Cricket Australia say, I'm really sorry about this, but you're going to have to start the Ashes 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, I honestly don't believe that they will say, no, sorry, the Ashes is sacrosanct. We're taking all our players out of the IPL. No, that's not going to happen. I mean, John, there's no limit to what, and I don't mean this in a BCCI being bullies. I'm just talking about pure economic facts. And such is the dependence on the BCCI. If the Ashes has to be moved, it will.
Chetan, is there anger in India? I know the Times of India wrote a pretty scathing article about the IPL, saying enough was enough. Either keep it in one city or just suspend it because it's getting a bit ridiculous. Everybody's been saying that the chances of it continuing unscathed are almost nil. So is there anger that it's even allowed to have got this far?
John, the people of India are angry about a lot of things at the moment, and IPL is not one of their concerns. I think they're more concerned about health services and what the government's been doing for the past 6 months, which has got us into this situation in the first place. There will be anger in the BCCI. There's going to be ramifications. The franchisees are angry because they're losing a lot of money. Star Sports, the broadcasters, they have invested a lot of money. They'll be losing a lot of money on this. And Neil is right. There will be pressure from the BCCI to complete it because there's just so much money riding on the IPL. The world cricket economy, in a way, is dependent on the IPL. And apart from the T20 World Cup, there's no other event which is more important than the IPL, not even the World Test Championship. Coming back to your point, the anger will be within the BCCI. There are reports now emerging that this year's bio bubble were not as secure as they were made out to be. They did not hire the same services that they hired in the UAE last year. They did not have centralized bio bubbles. People could come in, go out of the bio bubbles, which is come on, when you have so much money at stake, so much at stake, you just cannot do that. And the result is in front of us. So the top brass of the BCCI, they were also urged to take this season to the UAE and not play in India. But the BCCI were adamant that because they wanted to host the T20 World Cup in India, they needed this tournament. I mean, they could have played in 2 cities. They could have played it in Mumbai and finished it. So somebody in the BCCI is going to answer for this failure. I'm not sure who's, I'm not going to take any names. I'm not going to say who it's going to be, but somebody has to answer and take the fall for this.
So the chances of let's start with the World T20. What chance the World T20 takes place in India?
At this moment, I would say it's a 70-30 chance, because let's be honest, it's going to be in October. If you push it maybe a week or so, I'm hopeful. We are sitting in the first week of May. I'm hopeful over the next 2-3 months, India can get control over this raging pandemic, and then start to think of the T20 World Cup. The vaccination program is going on. A lot of people will have recovered from the COVID pandemic at that time. The ICC will not be in any hurry whatsoever to move a tournament away from India. The BCCI will not let it go so easily unless and until it exhausts all the possibilities. So yeah, I would say 70-30 at the moment, but the longer the pandemic rages on, the lower the possibility of the T20 World Cup happening in India.
But Chetan, what about from a player's point of view? I'm coming from the player's point of view here. I mentioned in the first half of the show about England leaving Sri Lanka because COVID was so rife in England. They wanted to be with their families, you know. And we look at England, India coming to England on July. Are the players are they going to want to leave to come? You can all talk about boards and, you know, and government bodies and the ICCs, but I'm talking about a player's point of view here. If a players group, and I'm talking about the Players Cricket Association or FICA, turn around and say, you know what, forget your board, forget your tournament. We don't think it's right for our players to go and play in these tournaments, to go and play in this country, to be part of this, because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Where does that argument stand?
You're talking about the T20 World Cup?
I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about India coming to England in July. I'm talking about the T20 World Cup. I'm talking about if this continues, the players have power, but they don't really have power because it sits with the governing bodies. But if you've got no players because it says, you know what, I'm not going back to India, or, you know, India players are rightly so. Ashwin left the bio bubble in Delhi because he thought that it was more important for him to look after his family at this moment in time. If a lot more players think that way, where's cricket without players?
It's an important question, an interesting one, Steve, but do the player bodies have that much power when it comes to the national associations? I mean, at some point, the pandemic is going to die down, maybe not this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after that. Normalcy is going to resume. Is anybody going to hurt their chances of never playing in the IPL again, ever? I don't think so strictly. I mean, the IPL was being played in the middle of a pandemic. How many players packed their bags and left? 3 Australians. Ashwin left because his immediate family was infected. MS Dhoni's parents were infected, but he did not leave the bio bubble. He continued to play on for 2 weeks. So every individual has a decision to make here. Obviously, the conditions in other countries is much better. India toured Australia. They were pretty free over there after their initial quarantine period. New Zealand is free from this disease. They're vaccinating. UK is vaccinating at a very good pace. And I mean, your crowds are coming back to the grounds at football, and they're expected at the cricket as well this summer. So the situation is different for every country. If the tournament moves to the UAE, I'm talking about the IPL plus the T20 World Cup moving to the UAE, I don't see any reason why the players wouldn't want to go. I mean, if there's no COVID, there's no pandemic there, it's the safest place to be honest. So it's going to depend a lot on the situation. It's going to depend a lot on what the individual players are feeling. The one thing that I am concerned about is India's tour of South Africa in December. Commercially, probably India will make up for those 3 ODIs or T20s that Saurav Ganguly had promised to Steve Smith. But South Africa is also not in a very good situation. Maybe the situation is improving there, but obviously better than India. Maybe Neil can tell us, but if the situation doesn't improve there in terms of the pandemic, will the Indian tour happen? So that is probably my one concern over this year's calendar.
Manus, what is the situation there? What do you expect to be occurring come December?
Well, as far as you can ever say the situation is under control, it is. I mean, we've only had essential workers and health workers vaccinated. The general population hasn't started being vaccinated yet, although the vaccines have arrived and that program will roll out soon. But there's been no third wave. It's the feeling certainly today. The biosecure bubbles. I mean, given that South Africa's first attempt was at a 5-star hotel in Cape Town for England's white ball tour at the end of last year, that didn't go so well. 2 hotel staff tested positive, but since then, South Africa has held all of its domestic tournaments in biosecure environments. Pakistan toured, Sri Lanka toured, all went well. I can tell you that it's not just the ECB who are worried about India coming to England, because I know there's, South Africa, I can honestly say South Africa run a very cricket South Africa, that is, run a very strong chance of bankruptcy if that India tour doesn't go ahead. And I know that the ECB are desperate for India to tour as well. 5 test matches. It's going to be a very lucrative series, and that ends on September the 14th. But if India don't get to South Africa, then I think we'll be reapplying for amateur status.
Oh, it's all a little bit bleak at the moment. Chaitan, look, the most important thing, as you made mention at the start, there are more important things, aren't they? And hopefully India can go the same way that the UK seems to, because we were in similarly bleak position in January, February, March, and as you make mention, crowds are coming back, sun's out, and thankfully with the vaccination process up and running, we're in a much better place. So hopefully in a couple of months' time, that's exactly where India will find itself. But you stay safe and to your family, and we'll speak to you again soon. So far on the show, we've been dissecting some of the ramifications from the suspension of the Indian Premier League. When will it be played? What will have to make way? How the players feeling? And really trying to get our heads around this seismic incident. Let's hear from a player, though. Joe Clarke, currently playing for Nottinghamshire, but he does have similar experience, not in the IPL, but whilst playing for the Karachi King in the Pakistani Super League, which, of course, was brought to temporary halt because of a very similar situation. So he caught up with Harmy to talk about what it was like within the biosecure environment once it had been breached.
As players, I guess, obviously from my experience in Pakistan, it was, you could see how hard everyone was working to get things right, and to, as soon as there was coronavirus that came into the hotel, obviously there is some worried people, and that everyone's working so hard behind the scenes to get things right and to try and stamp down on it as quickly as possible. But there's also a worry that obviously if it's in the hotel, or you're seeing people on a daily sort of basis keep getting positive test results, then it does start getting worrying. And I think naturally, when you're away from home and that sort of stuff is happening, you immediately sort of get brought back to your family back home and your own sort of health, really. So I think obviously the right call was made in Pakistan, and from watching over the last sort of few days, the cases going up in India and the state of India itself, I think it's probably the right call for the players. But obviously, I think they'll understand that there obviously would have been a huge amount of work to have gone into to get the tournament going in the first place. But yeah, health and safety is the best for now, and hopefully it can get played at another time.
Thanks to you both. You have been listening to the Cricket Collective on talkSPORT 2. Thanks to the Institute of Cricket, and watching us on YouTube as well. Outside Edge And if you missed all that, download the following on podcast. But a big thanks to everybody involved in the recording of today's show. We will be back next week.